Hey, Luis. How's it going?
Good.
Ah,
There we go. Um, so as you may remember from our previous meeting, we discussed what our timeline is looking for the task force as a whole. We started off on May 18th with the task force kickoff. Today is actually the 21st, disregard, not the 7th. We are in our second anti-displacement task force wide meeting. We're going to give our check-ins. We're going to do some check-ins and some progress updates. But by now, most committees have either completed or are in the process of completing this first stage of our process. On the upper left-hand corner, you'll see convening committees. We have all had discussions regarding the current conditions, previous efforts that the either city or organizations have been doing with regard to anti-displacement work in each of your respective committees. We talked about research and we reviewed case studies, and we've either started or are having discussions or completed discussions on developing priorities. So all of us at this point here are somewhere in a process of going from convening committees to starting to do some policy development, starting to think about what the policy recommendations might be, what you're looking to research further, and start to do some maybe drafting on, depending on how far along in your agenda you are. One item that I wanted to bring to the whole task force as a whole was an equity statement that I had drafted that I wanted to make sure that we're all considering and seeing if we can make a motion to actually incorporate this as part of one of our values for this project. So I just had a quick draft here about what an equity statement looks like. And the most important part here is the part where we identify specifically what equity means, what the metric is for equity for this project. And suggesting here, focusing on specifically socially disadvantaged individuals. All of our committees are serving populations that have an intersection with socially disadvantaged individuals. So they could be residents, but they also could be business owners, and they could be creatives. Oh, my camera went out. Sorry about that. So with that being said, this equity statement is basically trying to acknowledge that the socially disadvantaged individuals, with respect to our committees, face disproportionate impacts to all of the effects of displacement and the pressures of displacement, and the causes of displacement. So wherever we have our populations that are being served, whether they be residents, small business owners, or creatives, or individuals who want to be small business owners or want to be creatives, but can't because of the existing structural conditions that prevent them from doing so. This equity statement essentially is to say that this project is meant to address the efforts that are going to be able to proportionally help our most socially disadvantaged individuals the most. So essentially, this is it's building on the city of Somerville's central community value of equity and acknowledging and mitigating historical inequalities. So this is just kind of taking some of the values that we already have and putting them to paper and seeing like how does this value apply to our specific project. So the end result would be that the task force prioritizes the needs of Somerville socially disadvantaged individuals, and we can contextualize those needs wherever possible. And this is basically another a North Star for us to keep in mind when we're doing our work with the committees, to think about impacts, right, of displacement, but also think about the disproportionate impacts those they have on our community. While there might be segments of the population that resonate with regard to some of the negative impacts of displacement or potential displacement, we want to also think about how proportionately that might impact on communities differently. And we want to contextualize whenever we can those experiences and really acknowledge them and try to address them as much as we can. So I'll give everyone a moment to kind of take that in. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you have any comments you want to add, now's the time. We'll take a minute to discuss this, and then if we have no further discussion, we can I can put forth the request to for us to add this to our charter. into our project statement. I see Ellen, you have your hand up. You're muted, sorry.
Hey, yeah, just wondering about class issues. Displacement obviously disproportionately also impacts people who are of lower income as opposed to people who are middle income or displaced. And I just don't know if that was thought about or discussed, but that's another piece of this, is trying, for me, part of equity is trying to target things towards the lower income portion of the population, in addition to racially and ethnically and culturally biased groups. So I don't feel strongly one way or the other about it being included, but I wanted to hear people's thoughts and just know sort of if it was consciously decided not to add that, or, what people's thoughts are.
Just to hit on that, actually, if you notice, this actually statement doesn't really talk about race or ethnicity at all. Actually, this term, socially disadvantaged individual, specifically, and it's worth going over and like word for word about what it actually means. It doesn't mention racial ethnic prejudice or cultural bias, but really what it talks about is identities of people, members of groups that don't have, that's for which they have faced specific barriers that are beyond their individual qualities, right? So they could be race and it could be ethnicity. I'm seeing now that actually it is in there, but it doesn't
is,
have to
and
be. It is not
it is
exclusive to
very
that, right?
clearly. Yeah, it's
Right,
very clearly, the other things are only
right.
under that racial and ethnic prejudice.
Yeah, and I think race and ethnicity are important intersections, right? But I think that a lot of the class issues that we have are intersecting with race and ethnicity closely. Poverty is intersectional with race and ethnicity. It is not exclusive to that, but the idea is that these are all qualities that are beyond the circumstances of the control of individuals who are being placed in this position, right? So the idea is that these individuals are having these biases placed on them, which includes race and ethnicity, but it could be income. But yeah, that's not exclusive to race and ethnicity, but rather it's talking about people who have a cultural bias in our society that has been placed on them for circumstances that are beyond their control, and they have no control over that. Maria, go ahead.
Thank you, Luis. Just I guess, a question on what Ellen mentioned. I think that at least the way that I'm interpreting this is there are things that you cannot change about yourself, right? Eventually someone who is disadvantaged because of their income, that is something that could be changed, right? And so when we talk about these other characteristics of individuals, these are characteristics that cannot be changed about them, and for which they are being judged in a negative way. And this bias further disadvantages them. So, like, all things being equal among two people who are destitute and facing extreme levels of poverty, if to that you add the other intersectional layers of race, ethnicity, culture, they are then further disadvantaged, right? And so that's how I interpreted it. But I guess the question is, I don't know if I'm misinterpreting the equity statement in that regard.
That's a good point. Yeah, I actually agree with that in that sense. Yeah. Rona.
Yeah, I just also want to, again, I don't think we should spend a lot of time on this because I think we're all generally on the same page with it. But cultural bias does not cover the old who are poor here, or the disabled people who are in the city. So I would want to throw something in there, and we could probably also put a sentence in there to say that to include, we're working toward housing for people who are poor somehow, to cover what Ellen is talking about, that poverty is the issue and this is another layer on the issue. And the other thing is a little bit of wordsmithing, which is, I think, this paragraph that starts "the city of Somerville holds" should be at the beginning, because I think that's the topic sentence. And the other things are information.
That's a good point. There was a concept of self-determination, which I think is kind of what a lot of equity work is going towards, or self-determination essentially means that an individual has the ability to and confidence that they have the means to be able to change the conditions in which they're living, and that they have the ability to have some social mobility if they want to. And I think that that could be something that we work towards in trying to refine this equity statement a bit. Getting to the point of this work of prioritizing and contextualizing individuals who are socially disadvantaged, and or have have intersections between poverty or ability or age, that the purpose is to work towards self-determination of all those communities, that they feel empowered, that they can change their conditions that they're working in, that whatever aspirations or abilities they are, what they're working towards, or goals, that they have the means or at least the support to be able to get to what their aspirations are. Maybe we can refine the equity statement to really identify that being the goal as well.
Like I have a comment about like I think that like disability and also race could be added just to the list that's like um already there. Like it already mentions like like cultural prejudice and bias. Like it just be add to that sentence. So like I'll say that because like I'm black and I also grew up low income and I'm also disabled, and like the income part is still big because even though I'm not low income anymore, like I face regular discrimination about my taste, about what I like. That's like a daily thing at work and stuff, just because of where I'm from. And and even though you can change how much money you have, there's still a lot of lifelong negative consequences people have to deal with.
Yeah, we can what I'll do is I'll modify this to well, we do have racial and ethnic prejudice, excuse me, on the slide itself, but the cultural bias maybe is a little too generic, does not really specifically call out the intersections of poverty and ability and age. So those are three things that we can add to that, specifically to call it out, with regard to what we're considering individuals who are socially disadvantaged. And then so we'll also add the goal of this all being to work towards self-determination of these groups of people, to change the conditions in which they're living and being empowered to do that on their own or within their own community. All right. Thank you all. That's all that we have for some housekeeping things that are task force wide related. So I will make those changes. And if I can place this on a contingent vote, if we agree on making those additions, and then incorporating this as part of our charter agreement for our values or our equity statement. Yeah, I'll put that forward. I'll propose that motion if anyone wants to support that.
I second it. Is that what I'm supposed to say?
Yeah, it works. We'll just do an opposition. Is there anyone in opposition to that?
Yes, I'm in opposition. I would rather see the statement before I vote that you're going to make the edits, and I don't feel comfortable with this statement at all for many of the reasons that my peers have stated. I think that we need to see the statement before I could feel comfortable voting in favor of it.
Fair enough. What I'll do is then I will draft up the statement, and then we will do a follow-up through email, and we will take it from there. And we will follow up until we have at least a consensus. Right, so that completes that equity statement part of the discussion this evening. So we are ready to move on to our readouts of our progress so far. We're going to start with our residential displacement committee. We have two co-chairs this evening. We have Jill Currier and Nicole Egbert, and I believe, Nicole, you're going to be handling the updates for your group this evening. Oh, is Nicole here? Not sure Nicole is here. Ellen, do you want to give us?
I could talk. Sorry, folks, I'm fighting through bronchitis, so I'm battling out a lost voice. Yeah, if Nicole isn't on, then I can take it from here if she has had to step away. So or Ellen, you're also welcome to talk. It's entirely up to you. Okay. So thanks everyone. And the residential, oh, Nicole just reconnected, Maria says.
Yes, I am here. So sorry, everyone.
Thank you, Nicole.
Yes, thanks, Jill. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Egbert. I am a Somerville renter. I live in East Somerville, and I've also been a tenant in Spring Hill. And I work at CAS, the Community Action Agency of Somerville, as the Director of Community Organizing. I'm super pleased to be working with all the city staff and volunteer community members of the residential subcommittee of the Anti-Displacement Task Force. A number of us were actually part of the original Anti-Displacement Task Force when it was first launched at the end of 2021. And so
Nicole, do you know that you cut out?
Yeah, we can't hear her.
What we can do in the meantime, we will move along to the Small Enterprise Displacement Committee, and we'll come back to the Residential Displacement Committee towards the end, once we see if Nicole can reconnect.
All right, thank you. Our chair, Christina Pescucci-Ciampa, is going to present for us. I believe Christina is here.
Yep, I'm here. Hi, how is everybody tonight? Thanks so much. And Louis, thank you so much for moving the slides around. I appreciate that as well. Hi, folks. So I am the chairperson for the Anti-Displacement Committee for Small Enterprise. Just so you know who I am, for those of you who don't know, my name is Christina Pescucci-Ciampa. I'm first the owner of a small business here in Somerville called All She Wrote Books, which is currently located in Assembly, but will not be as of next month. We will be moving because we've actually been displaced. So we will be moving into East Somerville next month. Anyways, that's not why I'm here tonight. What I'm here tonight to talk to you all about is about our amazing committee and the folks that really have added a lot to this, to the conversations that we've been talking about. And a lot of them are, you know, the equity statement that Louis had shared earlier. I just want to acknowledge that, like, that is something for us that is extremely important. With having Adriana and Ted and other folks on the call that, you know, are representational of those different experiences, that is part of like why this anti-displacement committee is, I'm really proud of how we've moved it forward. We can obviously do better, but I think that there's a good foundation to start with. So this is our membership. We have Lindsay Allen, who represents East Somerville Main Streets. We have Diane Borges, we have Daniel, who is also a business owner here in Somerville at La Braza. Joe Carrero, Matthew Carroll, Paul Casserly, Jessica Elshman, and sorry if I butchered your last name, Jess, I didn't mean to do that. Jess is our Union Square Main Streets rep. Felipe, and Anderson, Steve, there's so many of us, Charlie, Robert, Jeffrey, and Kristen is our representative from a counselor perspective. So if you want to move to the next slide, Lewis, I'd appreciate that. All right, so how do we work this? How do we do our process? So I am pretty much the facilitator of our meetings. So we meet once every month, towards like literally the third Thursday of the month. What we do is we make sure that we kind of have an agenda set ahead of time, send that out to the group, and ultimately do some, you know, if there's some research that's come out that we've read about, maybe we'll have a conversation about it. Otherwise, we just kind of launch into kind of like starting to formulate our plan. And that is kind of where we're at right now. Ted and Adriana, like I mentioned, help with research and technical support. They're very valuable, and we appreciate their time and energy that they've been giving to us as a committee. And Adriana especially accommodates our members who speak English as a second language and ensures they participate as much as possible. Adriana, do you want to talk up a little bit more about your role in that and making sure that when it comes to like this equity statement that we looked at this evening, and just in general, like how important it is to have those different perspectives?
Thank you, Christian. I'm glad to do it. Hi, everyone. I don't know if the slide that I shared. Yeah, this one. So I'm going to share how we have been improving minority businesses engagement during this process. This is for sure a learning process for all of us. And I really believe that all the three committees have been doing their best to make sure minority groups are well represented and that their voice have been heard. So when we started the process, we recruited like minority businesses owners to be members of the community, and it included like visiting the businesses, not just sending emails or general announcements, but we with the thanks to the both main streets that keep letting us know the businesses that have been displaced or at risk of displacement. So we went to visit them and let them know that we really care about their perspective, their unique perspective. And so however, we had to make some accommodations during the process the last 3 months, such as at the beginning, the application required like resumes. So we talked to Louise and said, how about if we don't ask for it, because business owners, they don't have necessarily like resumes. So Louise and all the committee, they were very open to accommodate their needs. And we keep in touch with minority members after the meetings to check how comfortable they are about the shared material. Is that understandable? Do you need translation? Do you want to clarify points? Is there something you would like to be considered that you didn't feel comfortable to tell us during the meetings? Why you didn't attend the last meeting, for example? Is there something that we could do to encourage you and to make you feel more comfortable? So at a certain point, we considered offering language assistance. We decided for the next meeting, we're going to work with small groups by language. Some members, they said that they would feel more comfortable if they could discuss like their language. So we've been like trying to accommodate. We're still in process. This is a progress project, and in progress project. We're still learning from all the members. And also we were able to take in consideration some short-term strategies that could help businesses to deal with current displacement issues. For example, lease negotiation. We don't need to wait till the the end of the process for us to start offering like legal assistance. So we've been in process of counting on ARPA money to provide those services. So I also thank all the members and nonprofits that they keep communicating with us. Let's start doing something. We know this is a holistic process, but there is something that we could do right away to help to facilitate the process. So as I said, we've been learning a lot in order to guarantee that this is a fair process and an inclusive process. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. I appreciate that. Louis, if you don't mind going to the next slide. All right, so consensus building. So we talked, Adriana touched on this a little bit, but just to go a little deeper into that, we really tried to make sure that we really were like understanding root cause. Why does displacement happen in small businesses, with certain types of small businesses, and so on? So what we learned is small commercial tenants don't control their destinies, which they don't right now, because they don't control their own business spaces unless they own the building or own the space for that matter. And small businesses need to own their spaces to be more stable and secure, is what we've realized with research and with understanding and experience that has been shared throughout the group. And the other piece of this is like businesses also need to know what sort of redevelopment activity is going on around them to be alert for displacement effects, because unfortunately, when forms of redevelopment or development are occurring, and it's not necessarily like well known about what is going on with that project, or if there is any opportunity for any kind of small business in that new development or in the redevelopment, understanding what's in front of them, in order to navigate that better is really important. So that was some of the consensus building that we were doing, and really understanding like, what are the root causes of displacement when it comes to small business and small enterprise? Next slide, Louis, please. Thank you. All right, so small business concerns, displacement, lack of long-term leases. Many situations come into smaller term leases, whether that's maybe 1 or 2 years, 3 to 5, depending on what you're seeing. Like there's a lot of not so many long-term leases that we're usually seeing. There's also power dynamics with landlords. Adriana specifically talked about the fact that one of the short-term things that we're currently acting on and doing is making sure that small businesses, when they're going into lease negotiations, have some power within those negotiations, because typically most commercial leases favor the landlord, period, end of story. That is also true with tenant situations as well. But from a commercial perspective, we have seen that the power is usually with the landlord. Shortage of space to relocate, either temporary or long-term. We're seeing that as also part of how, a concern here. Non-viability of spaces within newly constructed buildings, evolving neighborhood demographics, disruption and delays can exacerbate vulnerability. So that could be like, if new development or redevelopment is stalled due to permitting or something else, that can cause a bit of a hang up, right? And then last but not least is the uncertainty on the ability to bridge those present difficulties and find potentially either a short-term or could be a potentially long-term solution where the business could ultimately stay within the area or jurisdiction that they're in. Next slide, please. All right. So what we have concluded with, and this was what we did in our last meeting, and which we're still, so this is not final. We are still kind of like fraying out all the details here. But what we all determined, because of what's been going on in Somerville, what's been going on from the rental crisis, but also, having its impacts and sinking its teeth into small business and small business displacement, is really chunking up short-term, mid-term, and long-term strategies. And if we're really going to be serious about really going the long haul, we have to be able to have those long-term ones still kicking down the road at the same time. But if we can do some short-term, to the point of Adriana talking about the lawyer aspect, let's try to do that. So the group just like started talking about, a lot of the things that we talked about and where they fit into short-term versus mid-term versus long-term. So couple of the things that we were thinking about for short-term is like a commercial tenant toolkit. So what this would be is like, if a small business was coming into the city of Somerville for the very first time, or even an existing business that may be deciding, hey, you know what? It's time for us to move our location, but we still want to be in Somerville. How can we do that effectively and make that a very smooth transition, right? So having that commercial tenant toolkit, which allows for them to have that ability to advocate for themselves when it comes to being able to navigate the things that they need in order to operate, but also at the same time, be able to potentially understand like, hey, when you go into a lease negotiation, maybe you should look at these things, right? We also have emergency swing space referrals. So we were talking about that because obviously displacement can come at any point. It can happen quickly. And most commercial spaces don't have enough time to necessarily react and then figure out another plan. So emergency swing space referrals would be something that we could potentially look at as a short-term solution. Site finding assistance. So this can be something that the city is actually already doing and providing some of that information, but maybe we could take a step further. So we were looking into that. ARPA Business Technical Assistance and Grant Program, which is the pilot that Adriana was talking about a little bit, and seeing how we can use that money even further to help businesses in need right away, not tomorrow, not 5 days from now, but now. And so, and then last but not least is improved development and information transmission. So what does that mean? What that means is like, how do we communicate better to small businesses about what's going on in the city, whether it comes to development or permitting or anything that has to involve a business in the city, understanding what that, you know, making sure that folks know, or, you know, the thing we know not everybody loves to talk about, but like parking, is parking being taken away in a particular street, right? So how do we have those conversations and making sure that those conversations are truly happening and that the information is flowing back and forth properly? From a midterm perspective, and this is like, again, estimating of 13 to 18 months of time, but we would be looking at commercial tenant assistance programs. So this could be like transition programs that we could offer funds, whether it's for moving, whether it's for, you know, other types of funding things. Commercial tenant bill of rights. This is super important. You know, there is no such thing that exists currently as a tenant bill of rights for commercial spaces or commercial businesses for that matter. And I think it's time, because we are definitely feeling the domino effects of what's happening from a from the rental crunch and the displacement that's going on that side as well. It's a trickle effect. And so having some bill of rights where we're somewhat protected, because right now many of us businesses are not protected at all from any kind of, like, other than literally one potential law, which is still weak, is a 93A law, but still, it's still not the most strongest thing to help businesses out necessarily. An amendment of vacant storefront ordinance, so actually looking to potentially put higher fines onto vacant storefronts that are just been sitting this entire time. No development has been done on them, nothing has been done. Affordable commercial space zoning amendment. So what this would be is ultimately a proposal for zoning. So if any redevelopment or development occurs, that a portion of any retail that's built within a mixed use space, and again, this needs to be sussed out more, but ideally what that would mean is it would be a dedicated, affordable commercial space for small businesses. And last but not least, the improved development of information transformation. So transmission, excuse me, not transformation, transmission. So again, making sure that that flow of communication is super important. And then last but not least is long-term. So again, we know that a lot of these things may flow into from midterm to long-term, but that's the point, is that there are going to be things that are going to shift around, but having a good strategy in mind to keep those things in order and keep them moving is how we're going to be successful in really making change. So again, Affordable Commercial Realty Corporation. So this is a nonprofit entity that could be formed by the city to lease space from new commercial developments and to sublet them affordably to local business tenants. So what that would do is that would ultimately have, and that would protect those spaces too with the commercial tenant bill of rights. And in other situations where our short-term stuff could also play into this. So it all has this ability to intersect each other throughout its time. And so that's really what we're hoping to do, is for this strategy to kind of bubble up into bigger and much more stronger safety nets for our commercial businesses. And then I think there's one more slide. Yeah, so research. So we've been using HRNA advisors to confirm findings of financial modeling at the Harvard Kennedy School of Study. We've also been exploring details of setting up an affordable commercial realty corporation. This was something that HRNA actually did a ton of research on and was able to conclude that these were actually some things that could be done to really help secure commercial spaces for small businesses. Next slide. All right, so future goals, mostly on the quarterly side. Again, things can be in flux, things can change, but for the most part, this is the pace that we're going at right now. So one of the things that we first kind of done is define the problems, really talk about and listen and make sure that we're still continuously listening, because definitely things change. And we want to make sure that we're also incorporating those changes as well. So defining the problems and really kind of sorting those out into, okay, what are some short-term kind of, understandings to solve those problems. So the second approach is like research and refining the short-term strategies. So why there's names listed next to them, I will explain. So what I want to try to do, because any good strategy should have bits of its strategy owned by certain champions. So what we're talking about here is that these folks would ultimately own helping the next step in this process to push this forward. So the person would be a champion. So what that would mean, thanks, Jeffrey. What that would mean is like really working to get that information that we need, the research, and really strengthen what those short-term strategies are truly going to be, and be able to kind of like separate those out so that way we can actually get some action items next to them. That's really going to be our next big push for this, because we want to make sure that we're moving, while we understand that things do take time, and especially with municipality or zoning major changes, those take time. But we want to make sure that we're pushing this agenda forward and this strategy forward as much and as quickly as possible in some capacity. So with that being said, the research and redefining of the short-term strategies will kind of be the next step. The third step from there will be researching and redefining medium-term strategies, which I think our Main Streets folks are very strong at doing. Which is why I think they can really help us with the medium and long-term strategies as well. So this is where Jess and Lindsay, while I didn't necessarily ask yet, but still, if this is something that you could help us champion as a group, I think that would be amazing. Now, what I mean by champion is, no, they're not going to be taking this on their own. What will be happening is they'll be the champion, meaning the person that oversees kind of all the inner workings underneath, once those short-term or term strategies are determined and action items are provided for each of those strategies, each of those like kind of items underneath that umbrella. And so what we would hope for is our committee to ultimately raise their hand for specific things that they think that they are confident enough to lead on with that champion to the finish line. So that is the current update that we have from the anti-displacement committee for small enterprise. I appreciate your time this evening, and thank you so much.
All right, that was excellent. Yeah, thank you so much, Christina. That was really informative. I will open it up to discussion, questions from the committee or reflections. Is there something that you heard this evening from the Small Enterprise Displacement Committee that resonated with you? Something that you might want to take to your committee or inspiration that you're taking from this? Does it start any ideas? Feel free to chime in. Ellen, go ahead.
This is actually more of a question. First of all, I thought it was really impressive and a lot of ideas that sound really concrete. So really great work. Thank you. I'm just wondering, I know that when you talked about sort of assistance funds, I wonder if you were thinking about things like cash assistance funds like we have. So if somebody can't pay their rent for a period of time, sort of like we have in residential, I just wasn't sure exactly what you were referring to and if it was what those components would be. Yeah, just
So Ted, Adriana, I don't know if you want to speak to that a little more in detail, but I'm also happy to
Sure.
chime in as well. But I think both of you are much more closer to that at the moment.
Well, right now, we're looking at all forms of assistance and what, is relatively more fundable or more allowable, given the different grant programs we're looking at. But initially, we thought that something like moving costs or relocation costs are probably the most applicable and eligible for most grant programs. Not sure if straight rent assistance for commercial tenants is allowable under some grant programs from the federal or the state government. I think using local funds, we have much more jurisdiction and much more leeway. So it really depends on where we get our funds. But we're looking at every type of assistance.
Yeah, and Ellen, just to piggyback off of that, and Adriana was touching on this as well, about having funds go to help like provide lawyer services. Obviously, I think many of us know how expensive lawyers are. And especially when it comes to commercial lease agreements, they can be pretty expensive. So that is another thing that we have talked about with those funds as well, aside from that kind of like immediate assistance.
Victor.
Hey, thanks for that presentation. That was really interesting. One thing I wanted to ask about, to the extent that you've had conversations about it, and it's perfectly okay if you haven't gotten that deep details yet. I love the idea of an affordable real estate corporation. I think that would have a lot of relevance for artist space as well, since that is also commercial development. And I think it tackles a fundamental issue, which is a lot of times when we talk about zoning requirements, we are extracting benefits from the same pool because they have a certain profit margin that they need to be willing to develop. There is some left over, and everything we do is competing for that. And so I think alternative methods of development is really key. But I think the biggest challenge is that organizations like this, while they can take on a smaller profit margin and generate more value for the community that way, or even just break even, because land cost is so high in this region, the initial capital to just acquire the land in the first place is a huge challenge for organizations like that. Have you had any conversations yet about potential mechanisms that would allow this organization to have access to that initial capital?
We are leveraging our relationship with the Cambridge Redevelopment Authority. They're looking at this model as well. We call it kind of a master tenant relationship, where an entity affiliated with the city, like a nonprofit corporation, leases blocks of space from private property owners and then subleases at affordable terms. The Cambridge Redevelopment Authority is thinking of doing that through with their own resources in different parts of Cambridge. And it's one of the models we're trying to explore further with the help of HRNA, our real estate consultants. We did some initial work back in the spring with the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. They looked at different ways that we can help mitigate and also ideally prevent disruption and displacement among businesses in the city. And they started looking into some preliminary research on this type of way of controlling commercial real estate, and then making sure that it is under some sort of community control, and that its destiny is not resting solely with private property. So it's going to take a lot more refinement, a lot more work, but it's an alternative to just forcing small business owners to rely on themselves to try to purchase their buildings or purchase, commercial condominiums or something along those lines. So it's going to take a lot more examination, but we want to start the process because we think it has some applicability and some legs in some.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor.
Joe.
I just want to dovetail off of Ted's comments as a member of the committee. One of the other things is specific to artists, it would not apply to us as small business owners, is that at the state level, there are tax credits that are available to commercial landlords if they're willing to engage in working with an artist collaborative as one of the opportunities to create art space. The city of Lowell has been exploring this for some of the old mill buildings that are otherwise abandoned and not being 100% used. There's a model in Lowell, it's called Mill Number 5, and it was based on around that premise. So you start to see, a couple floors were artists, and now the landlord was so happy about that, he started to work with small business folks to renovate some of the other floors to be almost like small shops and different other things. And it was something that I became familiar with, is that, my restaurant is lucky enough to own the property where we are in Lowell. So we are being approached by, Lowell about a lot of these kind of tax credit and tax incentives. And I've just been made aware of the situation with a lot of the artist collaboratives. So it's something for you all working with artists that's something that you could further explore.
All right. We have two more committees to go, so we're going to go ahead and wrap this section up. And we're going to go back a little bit to the Residential Displacement Committee. Nicole, I believe you are ready to go, right?
I am. Yes. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm really sorry about the connection issue earlier. So again, I'm Nicole Eichbrett. I'm serving as a co-chair of the Residential Committee alongside Jill Courier, who works in the Somerville Office of Housing Stability. And Morena Zelaya was also a co-chair of this committee, and she's currently on parental leave. It's great to see so many of our residential subcommittee members here tonight, as well as the other subcommittees. Big props again to the Small Enterprise Committee. It's really incredible to see the work that you've all been doing in such a short amount of time, and definitely eager to see some of your recommendations be put into implementation. So on the residential side, we do not have slides for you tonight, so I'm just going to be talking for a couple minutes, and I really invite my fellow subcommittee members to jump in or put things in the chat if I'm missing anything. So what I was saying when I originally lost service was that some of the members of our subcommittee have actually been part of the anti-displacement task force since late 2021, when the task force was first launched under former Mayor Curtis Tone's tenure. And so the initial question again was like, what are the municipal tools that we have to prevent the continued loss of residents here in Somerville, the majority of whom are low income and are not only renters, but also homeowners. So when our task force reformed this past spring and summer, and then split into these three subcommittees, our subcommittee reformed membership and includes advocates, many of whom have legal experience. We have tenants like myself, homeowners, small landlords, as well as several Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color. And we have been meeting nearly every other week for this past summer. And this time around, we've kind of relaunched ourselves with a really clear focus and mission. And that is working on recommendations for the City of Somerville's rent stabilization home rule petition. So a home rule petition is local legislation that cities and towns in Massachusetts file to the state legislature to request permission to take legislative action. So because rent control was banned by a ballot initiative nearly 30 years ago, at this point,
some of the few ways that we can reenact it is either the legislature passing a statewide legislation, the rent control passes again under ballot measure, or our city files a home rule petition. So that's what we've been focused on. And we've kind of been doing a really extensive community engagement process. And so in July, we hosted 2 separate listening sessions, and we had another one 2 weeks ago. Oh, or maybe it was this past week. These days are flying by. And at this point, I feel confident in saying that between these virtual in-person sessions, as well as collecting testimony in writing, we've received feedback from probably at least 100 or more residents in Somerville about rent stabilization. And our committee has also really done a lot of research and legwork ourselves to understand what are the core elements of rent stabilization. We have reviewed numerous case studies from cities around the country, as well as other research about the elements of this policy. We've also been doing comparisons between current proposals, such as statewide legislation, as well as home rules filed in the city of Boston. And we've been educating ourselves as well as educating the broader community about the elements of rent stabilization. And I'll just take a quick moment to name those. So some of the policy details that we're looking at is what, most importantly, is the rent cap, right? What percentage are rents capped at? We are examining what exemptions might exist under this policy. So perhaps owner occupied buildings or new construction for a certain number of years. We are also looking at vacancy controls. So this is the question of after a tenant moves out of their building, what happens to rent? Does it go up or does it stay where it is? We are also reviewing just cause evictions. So should a landlord be able to evict a tenant for no reason, or does there need to be just cause? And we are also looking at the enactment date and how it will roll out. And finally, the administration. So should there be a rent control board or some other body that manages this? And our goal is that by late October, fingers crossed, we have recommendations ready and a draft of the home rule petition to present to the mayor as well as city council. And I want to give a big thank you to OHS Director Ellen Schachter for all the legislative expertise you're bringing to this process, this stage in the process especially. So unlike our fellow subcommittees, we actually have not gone through the original root cause analysis, nor have we really directed our focus to the other tools that might exist. But that is what we will be orienting ourselves towards once the home rule petition process and those recommendations are filed. So yeah, I went through that pretty quickly, but I wanted to invite any other members of our subcommittee if you have anything you'd like to add. And then of course, questions from other members of the task force.
I would just add one thing. Nicole, thank you so much. That was perfect. And I think the only thing I would add, just so people know, I mean, we want to be clear that this is a big challenge. We're taking up the challenge of rent stabilization because it is so core to our ability to keep people in their homes, but it's a huge challenge. And so what we're trying to work with as we think through how to mold this legislation is both what's something that will truly help tenants, but also something that we have a chance of passing in the state legislature, which, as many of you may know, has been very conservative about anything that restrains private property. So that's really kind of one of the balancing pieces that we're trying to do as we move forward in thinking about what we want to present at the State House. And also, I think the last thing I would just say is that we absolutely want this to pass, and we're going to work to make it pass, but regardless, filing of this home rule petition really does add to the momentum at the State House. If there's a ballot question, the more cities and towns that are filing home rule petition, the more the legislature has to respond to the crying need. So I do want to say, even the filing of the home rule petition is a really important piece of this struggle, regardless of where it gets this session in the legislature. So we want it to happen in a real way, but we also want to build momentum for future years and future campaigns and do our part here in Somerville. So that's it.
I have a question. Could you talk a little bit, Nicole, about the balancing between the tools that we have to be able to prevent people from being displaced from their homes, and also the ability for people to have not necessarily to hinder the development of new properties and new construction in our communities. Like, what was, you talk a little bit about the balancing that the discussions the groups had in order to be able to reconcile those two considerations in a home rule petition.
Yeah, thanks, Luis, and thanks, Ellen, for your additions on that. Yeah, definitely want to emphasize that what we're doing in our subcommittee is only the first step in a pretty lengthy legislative process. So yeah, in our conversations and the consensus building that we're doing in our subcommittee, we are having real debate about, again, what's the equity angle with how tenants are impacted, but also property owners and landlords and their stake, obviously, in this. And one of the exemptions that we have seen with other rent control policies around the country is a certain number of years where new development, new construction is not subject to the stabilization law. So we've seen a range of proposals, though. Some policies say a 5-year exemption. We've seen ones that go to 15 years. And we are hoping to do more research to kind of dig in and understand, like, is there data and evidence that backs either one? All
right, anybody? Oh, yeah, Jen.
Thanks for hosting those listening sessions. I found them really meaningful to hear a number of perspectives. Where I understand that there must have been a lot of pressure from different viewpoints. Was there anything in particular that you learned from those sessions that might have changed your strategy?
Thanks so much for that question, Jen, and thanks for attending the sessions as well. I would love to open this up to anybody on the subcommittee. Would anybody like to share your thoughts in terms of what we heard? I know that Rona
I could talk to this, Nicole.
Oh, great, Jill. Thanks.
I've been drinking water and took cough medicine, so I'm faring a little bit better. So I don't know, and I'm sorry, just to clarify, Jen, are you asking if there's anything we learned that would have changed our strategy?
Yeah, or challenges beyond that, but really, like, was there a particular story or something where you had to sit back and go, oh, that's a really good point, maybe we should think about that?
Sure. So what I think I found most interesting in the responses to it, I don't believe that there's anything that we did, anything that we heard that would have changed our strategy inherently. I do think that the way that we led the third listening session probably should have dictated the first two. We were much more specific with the third and got really great feedback from it. So for anyone who wasn't a part of this, the different parts of the questions we're looking to answer in the home rule petition are what Nicole was speaking to in the beginning: exemptions, exceptions, what is the percentage that rent should be able to be raised by. And we sort of left the first couple sessions very open-ended. One was specifically targeted to renters, one was specifically targeted to landlords, and we let people sort of just give their opinions. Unfortunately, that led to a lot of just yay or nay. Yes, we want this. No, we don't want this. But knowing that we were moving forward with the home rule petition and we're looking for really constructive feedback, the third session, we dialed in really specifically on, these are the things that we're asking. These are examples of these different talking points. Could you let us know how you feel about those things? And people really followed up with that, and they gave us really constructive feedback. I think what I found interesting is that the large majority of renters who spoke were leaning to even more aggressive rent stabilization measures than we had really been looking at, and certainly much tighter protections than exist really anywhere where rent control has been passed. Much lower percentages year over year, much fewer exemptions. They weren't looking to exempt new construction. So we've learned a lot from listening to both property owners and renters. And I think that telling people what we were specifically looking to find out from them with the third session, what would have been a great help to do it all 3 times. So that was definitely a learning opportunity.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would add about learning and that we're sort of grappling with, one piece of this, just to know, once we pass a home rule, once a home rule petition gets drafted and it gets, let's say it gets passed and we get permission from the legislature to do this, it's going to have to go back to the city council for an ordinance and more hearings to, further refine what it is we end up with. So some things that are hard to decide, we're punting on and saying if we win the ability to do this, we'll struggle it out in City Hall, and other things we're trying to be clear on, to have a little bit of a framework. And I think one of the things that has always, there's a lot written about rent control. There's a lot of articles saying that rent control is a disaster and here's why. There's a lot of articles refuting that. So there actually is a fair amount of body of knowledge out there already about what most of the arguments are, pro and con, to different kinds of rent control schemes. And I think one of the things that the mayor feels strongly about, and that we all will struggle with if we get the authority to do this, is how do you do this in a way that doesn't prevent deterioration of units, that keeps units up to a certain level, that still allows for and encourages some amount of capital improvement. And these are some of the complicated nitty-gritty things that happen when you're figuring out rent control schemes. So I think what we are doing, just so you know, on that piece, is we're really going to acknowledge here are some things that don't fit neatly into this structure: capital improvements, large tax increases, large water sewer increases, certain things that are sort of outside the normal order. We're going to get to specifics if we get the authority to do this from the state legislature, and we're going to have to come to grips a little bit more with how we're going to figure out the nitty gritty. But we're signaling to the community through this home rule petition, we understand that these are issues that the landlord and owner community are raising. They're valid issues, and we understand that we have to grapple with them, and we'll do so down the road. And that's kind of where we're landing. But I would say that is one of the tricky issues to really understand how to get the sweet spot of the best policy that you can in there. Yeah.
All right, we have about 15 minutes left in our meeting. So we're going to go ahead and move on to our next group, which is our Creative Displacement Committee.
Thanks, Louise. I just want to thank both of the other committees for the presentation. It was very great. We will also be heavily leaning on all of your findings and initiatives as well, because the creatives industry both relies on commercial space and residential space to preserve artists in the community. So again, thank you for all your work, and it's exciting to see the stuff you're working on. So just a little bit of background. So we have been meeting on Zoom like most other committees, although we did host an in-person meeting earlier this month. And we're keeping an open membership because it is a little bit hard to, this is a long commitment process. A lot of creatives in our community also have day jobs as well as being creative. So we're at a big bandwidth of time issue, and as well as there's a lot of other creative planning programs going on in the city right now. So we're kind of like tapping into the community a lot. So we're just kind of being mindful of that process. And we just had a new member join earlier this month, and just kind of being mindful of also the voices that we're representing. But overall, we've also done the root cause exercise and dealt with kind of dealing with, what are the issues with space equity, who has access to what spaces, just a general affordability, and also just the overall lack of capital coming into the creative sector on an individual basis, and small scale artists. So we'll again be relying on some of those other initiatives like rent control, and I know some of that commercial stuff is also exciting. And thank you for mentioning that artist tax credit. I was not familiar with that. I did remember it was having a hearing process. I didn't know where it stood at the moment. But again, some of the other things like theaters and other bigger complexes don't always apply for some of that stuff. And thinking about how we can support all of our small scale commercial industry would be great. So some of the things we are focusing on, again, with current zoning already happening in the city, and we're already going into some changes, we're trying to find a niche actionable items that we can create that are not, you know, housing or super focused on affordable commercial space. And where does the creative sector fall in? So right now we have a great thing in our zoning, which allows for, in certain zones, new development is required to give 5% of space dedicated to arts and creative enterprise, which is a zoning category in our zoning ordinance. And right now we're working on a buyout fund with a consultant in the near future. So one of our processes to think about is how's that fund going to get managed, so we can create an action plan prior to any money existing. And that way we can equitably use this money across the city, across income, across discipline, across race, ethnicity, anything, kind of structuring this ready to go in an equitable fashion. And also stipulating how the funds can be used. And hopefully there's also a new state hearing that happened this week about the Creative Space Preservation Act, which allows municipalities to create a creative space trust. So hopefully tying in with that, if that ever passes, that would be great. We're also focusing on a city statement of values for the arts. So just to kind of give like a rough direction on all policies relating to arts and creatives, just giving us a framework, kind of like we have Summer Vision, but just focusing on more of an arts focused view. And we're also really interested in this, again, to bring forth more voices, and we would love for other people, other committees to consider this as well. But we've launched into this idea of collecting displacement stories to give a face to all of the people that are facing these issues in this, and why we're doing this work, and people that could not be part of this committee or like have the time and space to do this. So just a quick interview to collect these stories and share them with this report. And I'd say it feels something that we can do with, you know, across all sectors. And I know the residential displacement already did several of their meetings, which probably have many stories collected there. Yeah, and that's like kind of our first phase of projects. And then from there, we're going to launch into looking at legislation and for local like creative and entertainment districts, and what does that mean, and how can we institute kind of overlays to help protect creative businesses, especially as we face new development in things like sound bleeds and noise complaints, shutting down bars as we lose more music venues, and all of those kind of issues that we face with, you know, kind of creative sector of you know, businesses, but also, you know, what other regulations can we put into that place to like help keep these places that we already have, since we're seeing a lot of shutdown after COVID, and then currently with new tenant mix and whatever else in these districts. And then we're also looking at, so one of the biggest grants in the arts and creative industry for placemaking is called the Art Town Grant. It's from the National Endowment for the Arts, and potentially looking at other creative grant opportunities to looking at how we can potentially leverage those funds to create a program for creative displacement, and then using that as a launching pad to potentially get funding from the city in the future. So that would allow us to kind of have a grant application ready to go for next year on a program that we could potentially launch. And then we have a bunch of additional recommendations that we're not going to fully launch into, but like looking at other existing policy or things that may take more time and more need a specialized consultant to look at, such as potential other property tax incentives for arts uses, an agent of change policy, which again has to deal with noise complaints for music venues. That one really relies on, you know, new actors of the change. So that would be new developments are required for soundproofing, not, you know, expecting the music venue that's been there for 40 years to soundproof its place, but actually working on soundproofing the new residential units. And then looking at discrimination and bias reporting, just to keep our community safe, like Salem does. A creative trust to hold affordable space, which is, I mean, a further step of the buyout fund. And then, you know, language to include artists and creatives for commercial space assistance as well, because sometimes, you know, including those languages for artists to feel like they can apply to some of the commercial space stuff, because some of them don't qualify for artist grants, and some of them feel like the commercial and small business stuff aren't for them. So it's like kind of bridging that gap and showing people that there are resources out there for them. So it's just about that communication, kind of like the toolkit you had mentioned with a small business committee. So yeah, then we'll be launching into, we're just now launching into our preliminary research on stage 2. Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to keep this pretty quick for everybody. And yeah, we're gonna start exploring best practices and keep moving forward. I'd love to hear all of your guys' updates on all of your work, because a lot of it is very interesting to us. And happy to like talk in the future. Would love to potentially meet a few more times to hear about your projects as well. But yeah, that's a quick update for us. I'll take any questions or anything.
And I'll open up to everyone if we want to have some final thoughts here on similarities that you found in the way that you're approaching the problems, the people that you're trying to help. If anybody has any reflections on maybe some ideas that they've taken away from this, or maybe some things that they're thinking about bringing to their own committees, that'd be great just to kind of send us off on a positive note.
I just like to say what Michael actually, really made me think about the fact that, when we think about small music venues and things of, comedy venues, that's really a business. But at the same time, it's very important for creative stuff, because I remember during COVID, I was, we have a very close relationship with the owners of the Jungle in Union Square, and he and I had shared some virtual coffee together about kind of channeling the efforts that I was making to try to keep the restaurant industry alive, together with supporting the stuff that he was individually facing that I would never have necessarily thought about, and understanding the parallels between his type of business and mine. So thank you, Michael, for reminding me about how important that is, to understand that there are, professional artists or professional creatives too, that we have to consider in what we're doing.
I was just going to add a quick comment to add to what both Michael and Joe said, because we've had some interesting discussions about this in the creative displacement group as well. That for a lot of artists, they have this fantastic skill set when it comes to creating beautiful work, but they don't necessarily have the business background. And that is ultimately at least part of the equation to make their more resilient to issues like displacement. So we've talked quite a bit about how we can offer more services on that front, how we can help, and really kind of promote that kind of knowledge within our artist community. And so I think in addition to everything else we've talked about, that's a really interesting venue to tackle as well, specifically when it comes to creative uses.
Sorry, y'all had a trouble unmuting there. Okay, so that wraps up our second task force wide meeting. We have a follow-up for the equity statement that I will reach out to everyone via email for. Some things that I might be working on in the future are trying to work more conversations like this into our workflow. I'm going to try and see if there's a way for us to kind of maybe have a way to post either on like a bulletin board or some kind of messaging way that we might be able to communicate with a larger group about things that we find, resources, strategies that we're uncovering that might be useful for all of us to share in between these updates. And I'm also going to be trying to be more proactive about the next meeting. I know that some of us have got caught by surprise on this meeting date, but yeah, definitely I'll try to get more notice and everybody on heads up in the next meeting. It's actually in January. So we have a little bit of time to make sure that we get more notice on that. And we will, we'll hopefully see everyone in January for our next update. And everyone's really got some exciting stuff going on. I'm hoping to see some even further developments on those fronts. So thank you everyone for attending and have a great night.
Thanks all. Thank you.
Thanks, Luis. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.